ozone layer above the Earth suddenly tore open a huge hole. A blast of 140-degree cold air poured down towards the sea. Meanwhile, on a nearby research vessel, a man had just detected the sudden temperature drop, but within seconds, the frigid current swept through the ship, covering its body with frost in an instant. Hearing the continuous alarms blaring aboard the ship, the crew scrambled to flee, only to find the vessel completely surrounded by the cold stream. Relentless cold air gushed into the cabin through the vents. The man was astonished as he witnessed all the computers freezing within moments. The next second, the cold air closed in on him, with no way out. He was helplessly frozen into an ice sculpture. The ship, following its original course, was propelled by the still operating engine and collided with the shore. Meteorologist Jack couldn't fathom that just a couple of days ago, he was conversing with his friend, who was now one of the 13 crew members frozen to death. Eager to unravel the disaster that killed them all, Jack hastily boarded the cabin with his assistant, aiming to retrieve the truth from the data backed up on the hard drive. However, the hard drive had already been severely corroded by water. Returning to the meteorological station, they dried the hard drive with a hairdryer and connected it to the computer. They managed to retrieve the weather data recorded that day, although much of it was severely damaged or lost. Suddenly, an image of the torn ozone layer caught Jack's attention. After continuous analysis and speculation, he concluded that the recent solar eclipse might have unexpectedly affected the middle layer, causing the abrupt temperature drop. Although the ozone layer acts as a buffer, protecting people from the cold of the universe, human emissions of greenhouse gases had led to the warming of the ozone layer, consequently allowing the cold air from the universe to directly pour through the hole in the ozone layer, pouring down onto the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Jack solemnly informed the director of the Meteorological Bureau that this 140-degree cold wind would sweep across the globe, plunging the United States into an ice age the following day. However, the director thought Jack was merely trying to scare everyone and feared that it would cause panic. He suggested intensifying monitoring of the cold wind. Helpless, Jack had no choice but to turn to a media friend, hoping to inform the public of the disaster and encourage them to take precautions in advance. But his friend was worried about losing his job and advised Jack to come back with absolute data. Left with no choice, Jack first ensured the safety of his family. He informed his wife of the severity of the situation and instructed her to take their daughter Mina and her grandparents to the meteorological station for shelter, as it had a generator and supplies. Jack then headed to the school to pick up his daughter Mina but couldn't find her there. From a classmate, he learned that Mina and 2 other classmates had skipped school to go to the beach. Realizing the danger, Jack quickly drove to the shore. His assistant called, informing him that the satellite showed the cold wind would land on the beach in an hour. At that moment, Mina, along with her friends, sat on the beach, startled by her father's call. She hurriedly hung up. One of her friends wanted to swim, and Mina followed him to the sea. However, the cold wind swiftly closed in on them, catching them off guard. Ignorant of the danger, they took out their phones to record the spectacle.
Help me!
Jack found them and warned them that the mist would freeze them to death. Upon hearing this, the female friend dashed towards the sea, trying to get her boyfriend, who was surfing, to come back. But in the next second, her boyfriend was frozen solid, just like an ice lolly. Jack and the others quickly left the beach, but the cold air behind them was moving very fast. Jack swiftly turned the car around, narrowly evading the cold stream. On the way, he immediately contacted his news friend, informing them that the cold stream had landed on the beach and had just killed 2 people. Hearing the news, the friend quickly reported it, and soon the National Meteorological Bureau got the information. They immediately contacted all television stations and urgently issued a frost wave alert. People outside, upon hearing that the temperature would drop by dozens of degrees in an instant, were frightened and rushed back home, hastily boarding up their windows with wooden boards. Shortly after, the cold stream swiftly arrived in the city, freezing everything in its path. A passenger plane preparing to land was forced into the white mist but was frozen the next second and tragically exploded upon hitting the ground. The people who couldn't escape desperately fled, only to be frozen to death outside. Jack and the others hurried back to the meteorological station, and soon the cold wave swept in. Fortunately, the station withstood the cold wave. Jack monitored the hole in the ozone layer through the computer, where the cold air continued to pour onto the Earth. If they didn't find a way to plug the hole, the entire planet would soon enter an ice age. Jack quickly came up with a plan and called his meteorological station boss, hoping he could help implement it. However, the boss claimed he had already thought of a solution, intending to release 300 balloons filled with chemical reagents near the ozone layer and then shoot them down with missiles. This explosion would generate high temperatures, halting the spread of the cold air. Jack immediately opposed this approach, knowing it would only temporarily halt the cold stream, which would become even colder once it resumed. The boss persisted in his decision and contacted the US military to prepare for the plan. Helpless, Jack had his assistant continue monitoring the cold wind. Suddenly, the assistant noticed a significant drop in temperature. The cold air had encountered another air current, causing the cold stream to sweep towards Tokyo, Japan. The spread of the cold stream became even more rapid, and other countries around the world also fell victim to the cold wave's attack. By this time, the U.S. military had prepared the chemical balloons, and the fighter jets on the aircraft carriers were on standby. However, the National Meteorological Bureau then detected that the cold wind was changing direction again. 45 minutes later, the military base would also be under attack. The Bureau immediately informed the military to quickly launch the balloons. 15 minutes later, all the balloons were in the air, and the fighter jets on the aircraft carrier began to take off. But the next second, the cold wind arrived in front of the aircraft carrier. The people on the deck rushed to escape. But shortly after, the aircraft carrier was frozen solid. The boss's assistant, fearing the mission would fail, secretly sent the composition of the chemical agents to meteorologist Jack. Everyone nervously stared at the screen. The fighter jets received the command and launched missiles toward the pouring cold air. Then the chemicals carried by the balloons were released one after another. Whether this mission could stop the terrifying cold stream remained to be seen. It's intended to use the heat generated by the missile explosion to force the cold air to stop. However, a few seconds later, with the explosion of the missiles, not only did the pouring cold air not stop, but the temperature dropped by another 40%. The failure of this plan resulted in the globe soon plunging into an ice age. With no other options, the meteorological station boss contacted meteorologist Jack and inquired about the plan he had previously devised. Jack stated that he wanted to use a rocket to launch high explosive fuel into the sky above the hole in the ozone layer. The resulting explosion would trigger a chain reaction of lightning in the clouds. Through simulations, Jack determined that the lightning path would release 9 million volts of high pressure, which would be sufficient to allow the hole in the ozone layer to self-heal. After cutting off the cold air at its source, the Earth's temperature would return to normal. The boss fully supported this plan and immediately began preparing for the rocket launch. He instructed Jack to calculate the target orbit for the rocket launch. However, while the computer was performing the calculations, the assistant suddenly collapsed due to diabetes. His medication had run out a few days ago. In this critical moment, Jack had to go out to get the medication. At the same time, the boss called via video. When he learned that Jack was not in the lab, he had no choice but to remotely instruct Jack's daughter Mina to upload the calculated target orbit to the meteorological headquarters. Fortunately, Mina found the website to upload the files, but shortly after the data had been uploaded for a while, the computer suddenly went black, causing the communication to disconnect. Subsequently, the laboratory fell into darkness and cold due to the power outage.
Naomi?
Mina had to run to the assistant and they embraced each other, waiting for Jack to return. Shortly after, Jack arrived in time. He first injected medication into the assistant and then rushed to the basement to repair the generator. By this time, the cold air had swept across the globe, and the Golden Gate Bridge was on the verge of being destroyed once again. The military urgently called and informed Jack that they could no longer wait for the trajectory data. If the cold stream spread to the rocket launch well, everything would be irreparable. The meteorological boss was also extremely anxious, but he was still unable to contact Jack. Fortunately, after Jack's continuous repairs, power in the laboratory was finally restored. Jack promptly uploaded the rocket trajectory data, which the boss quickly forwarded to the military. 3 rockets swiftly launched from the secret base and flew towards the hole in the ozone layer in the sky. Everyone anxiously watched the screen as the rockets separated and fell off, and the fate of humanity entered its final countdown.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
With a violent explosion, the sky above the ozone layer was instantly filled with lightning. Shortly after, the latest satellite data showed that the hole in the ozone layer was slowly healing, and the center of the cold air had begun to dissipate. Everyone cheered with excitement. The frozen parts of the Earth also began to gradually thaw, and Jack successfully reunited with his wife and daughter.